The screen is pitch black. A low rhythmic bass sound thumps, like a heartbeat slowing down. White text fades in, sharp and jagged. Two Americas. They tell you the soul of this nation is healing. They tell you that joy is enough to fill a gas tank or pay a mortgage. But while one America dances in diamonds, the other is burning in silence. Tonight we aren't just telling a story, we are exposing the split screen the mainstream media refuses to show you. We are peeling back the curtain on the glittering lie. Montage of quick, violent cuts, a champagne glass shattering versus a gavel hitting a foreclosure sign. A red carpet flashbulb versus a muddy boot stepping into a puddle. A celebrity laughing versus a veteran staring at a wall. If you are tired of being ignored, if you are ready to see the truth they try to bury, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and comment "I see it" below to break their algorithm. They don't want this story to spread, which is exactly why we have to tell it. The night was glimmering in Beverly Hills. The air didn't smell like smog, sweat, or bills coming due. It smelled of imported orchids and heavy, expensive perfume. Outside the gilded ballroom of the Four Seasons, a line of black SUVs stretched for 3 blocks, idling softly as they delivered the kings and queens of the new American aristocracy. Inside, the lighting was soft, amber-hued, and meticulously designed to erase wrinkles and reality alike. Michelle Obama took center stage. She didn't walk, she floated. Draped in a custom silk gown that cost more than most families in the Rust Belt earn in a year, she smiled that practiced camera-ready smile that had graced 1,000 magazine covers. Flanked by A-list actors and platinum-selling singers, she laughed, twirled, and basked in the adoration. "To legacy," a Hollywood producer toasted, raising a crystal flute of vintage champagne towards the chandelier. "To joy," Michelle echoed, the word floating effortlessly over the polite applause. The room erupted in self-congratulatory cheers. It was a celebration of them, their influence, their power, their untouchable bubble. They clinked glasses to a world where gas prices didn't matter, where crime was just a statistic on a news ticker, and where struggle was something you wrote about in a memoir, not something you lived. Hard cut. No fade, just a jarring snap to reality. 2,000 miles away, in a town hall in rural Ohio, the lights weren't golden. They were fluorescent, flickering with a low, irritating hum that set your teeth on edge. The air didn't smell like orchids. It smelled of stale coffee, damp drywall, and quiet desperation. KarolineLeavitt stood on a cracked wooden stage. She wasn't wearing silk. She wore a blazer that she'd been wearing for 12 hours straight, the shoulders dusted with the grime of the road. She wasn't facing a crowd of adoring celebrities. She was facing a room of ghosts. Veterans missing limbs sat in folding chairs that groaned under their weight. Mothers held up faded photographs of sons lost to fentanyl, pictures that were worn soft from being touched every single night. Factory workers with calloused hands sat with their arms crossed, their eyes hollowed out by months of unemployment and years of broken promises. There were no press handlers here, no makeup artists to powder their nose or check the lighting, just pain, raw, unfiltered, and ugly. In the front row, a woman named Sarah trembled. Her knuckles were white as she clutched a piece of paper, a crumpled eviction notice. She didn't scream, she just looked at Karoline with eyes that had run out of tears. "They told us help was coming," she whispered, her voice breaking the heavy silence of the room. "But the bank is coming on Monday." Karoline didn't blink. She didn't check her watch. She didn't look for a teleprompter to tell her how to feel. She stepped forward, grabbed the microphone, and threw her prepared remarks onto the floor. The sound of the papers hitting the wood echoed like a gunshot. "They are lying to you," Karoline said. Her voice wasn't polished. It was low, steady, and dangerous. Right now in California, Michelle Obama is dancing. She is surrounded by billionaires who tell her she's brave for wearing a gown. But while they toast each other in mansions, you are being taxed out of the homes your grandfathers built. While they celebrate their legacy, you can't afford milk for your children. The room didn't cheer. It went dead silence. The truth hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They want you to believe that their joy is your victory, but joy doesn't pay the rent, and a photo op doesn't stop the bank. And then it happened. One man, grizzled and scarred from a war that Washington had long forgotten, stood up in the back. He leaned on his cane, his breathing ragged. "Finally," he muttered, his voice gravel and grit. "Finally, someone sees us." Back in Hollywood, a news alert lit up a producer's iPhone screen. Viral clip: KarolineLeavitt goes off script in Ohio. Michelle, mid-laugh, paused. For a split second, the mask slipped. She looked around at the glitz, the lights, the overwhelming fakeness of it all. The applause suddenly sounded thin. The champagne tasted flat. But Karoline wasn't watching Hollywood. She was still in that room, sleeves rolled up, stepping off the stage to hold Sarah's hand. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't politics. This was war. And Karoline had just fired the first shot.
The sun had barely risen over the Potomac before the machine began to whir. By 6 a.m., the narrative had already been written, polished, and distributed to every major network. The talking points were identical across channels. On CNN, a panel of 4 impeccably dressed pundits sat around a glass table, shaking their heads in performative sorrow. "It's populism at its most dangerous," one commentator said, adjusting his rimless glasses. "KarolineLeavitt isn't offering solutions. She's selling rage. It's unrefined. It's divisive." "It's a threat to our institutions," another agreed, sipping from a branded mug. The establishment was terrified. You could smell it in the desperate flurry of press releases and the frantic booking of unity segments. They needed to crush the viral moment from Ohio before it became a movement. And they knew exactly who to call to do it. Cut to Los Angeles, a soundproofed, climate-controlled studio. The setting was a sanctuary of liberal comfort: velvet armchairs, low-hanging Edison bulbs, and a table adorned with artisanal water bottles. This was the recording space for The Forward Path, a podcast hosted by one of Hollywood's most elite voices, a man who preached equality from behind the gates of a $10 million estate. Michelle Obama sat opposite him. She looked effortless, wearing a cashmere sweater that whispered casual luxury. The lighting was warm, softening every edge, making the room feel like a womb of safety. "I saw the clip," the host said, leaning in with a sympathetic grimace. "This young woman, Karoline, she seems so angry. Does that worry you?" Michelle let out a practiced melodic chuckle. It was the sound of someone who had never had to worry about an overdraft fee. "It doesn't worry me, honestly. It saddens me. When you lead with anger, you lose the nuance. True leadership is about grace. It's about rising above the noise. I've sacrificed so much of my privacy, my life, to try and bring people together. And when I see someone tearing that down for a soundbite, well, it just shows they don't understand the burden of service." The host nodded vigorously. "Exactly, the burden." Hard cut. No music, just the sound of packing tape ripping. Des Moines, Iowa, the basement of the Veterans Hope Shelter. The air here was freezing. The heater had broken 3 days ago, and the room smelled of damp concrete and bleach. KarolineLeavitt wasn't wearing cashmere. She was wearing a gray hoodie, the sleeves pushed up, revealing forearms smeared with dust. She wasn't sitting in a velvet chair discussing nuance. She was carrying a 40-pound box of canned goods, hauling it from a loading dock to a storage room because the shelter was understaffed and the volunteers were exhausted. "Careful with that one," a man named Frank rasped. He was 60, a Vietnam vet who had been sleeping in his car until last week. "My back's shot, or I'd help you." "I got it, Frank," Karoline said, her breath visible in the cold air. She dropped the box with a heavy thud and wiped sweat from her forehead. A young volunteer, shivering near the door, held up her phone. Her hand was shaking. "Karoline, you need to see this." Karoline walked over, squinting at the cracked screen. It was the clip from the podcast. Michelle's face, perfectly lit, talking about the burden of service and sacrificing privacy. Karoline watched it once. She didn't chuckle. She didn't offer a nuanced critique. Her jaw tightened until the muscle jumped. Privacy. She whispered. She looked around the room, at Frank, shivering in his coat, at a widow in the corner, folding a flag she had received at her husband's funeral, a husband who had died because the VA made him wait 6 months for a scan. The volunteer looked at her. "Do you want to draft a statement? My cousin knows a guy at Fox." "No," Karoline said. "Give me the phone." She didn't check the lighting. She didn't fix her hair, which was messy from labor. She stood against the concrete wall, the shelter's flickering fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and hit record. I just listened to Michelle Obama talk about sacrifice from a studio in Hollywood. She talks about the burden of being famous, the burden of living in mansions and having Netflix deals. "Michelle, look around me." She panned the camera to the cold room, to the empty shelves they were trying to fill, to the veterans huddled in coats indoors. This is the burden of service. It's not a podcast appearance. It's smelling the bleach. It's carrying the boxes because no one else came. It's looking a widow in the eye and telling her that her country hasn't forgotten her, even when we both know Washington has. She turned the camera back to herself. Her eyes were tired, but clear. "Don't lecture us about sacrifice while you're counting your millions. I don't need a stylist, Michelle. And I don't need your grace. I need a seat at the table for the people you pretend don't exist." She posted it. No captions, no hashtags. Just the raw file. Split screen effect. In Los Angeles, the podcast producers were high-fiving over their engagement numbers. They thought they had won the news cycle. They thought the grace narrative would hold. But in the real world, the ground was shifting. Karoline's video hit 4 million views in 2 hours. It wasn't shared by pundits. It was shared by mechanics on lunch break, by nurses working double shifts, by fathers waiting in school pickup lines. The comment section wasn't a debate. It was a roll call. "My son is in a shelter like that. Thank you, Karoline. I haven't seen a politician lift a box in 20 years. Michelle lost me the second she danced while we sank." That evening, CNN tried to run a segment titled "The Glamour of Leadership versus the Anger of Populism," but they had to cut it short. The ratio on social media was catastrophic. Michelle's PR team sent out a frantic email. "We are losing the narrative. She's too real." But Karoline wasn't reading the comments. She was back on the loading dock, wrestling another crate of water into the cold, dark shelter. The media war was raging, but the real work, the work that breaks your back and heals your soul, was just beginning.
3 weeks later, the invitation arrived in the inboxes of Washington's power players. It was heavy stock, cream-colored, with gold embossed lettering. "Healing Together, a Night of Resilience with Michelle Obama." The venue was the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel in downtown Chicago. The aesthetic was accessible elegance. There were no velvet ropes this time. That would be too exclusionary. Instead, there were tasteful arrangements of white lilies, dim ambient lighting that mimicked a sunset, and servers passing trays of organic, locally sourced hors d'oeuvres. Michelle stood at the podium, looking solemn yet hopeful in a navy pantsuit that projected serious leadership. The audience, tech CEOs, foundation directors, and media moguls, leaned in, captivated. "Healing isn't a straight line," Michelle said, her voice dipping into that familiar, comforting cadence. "It's a journey. We have to hold space for one another. We have to find the light, even when the world feels heavy. That is how we rebuild. Not with anger, but with community." Applause rippled through the room. It was polite, civilized, and completely detached from reality. Cut to East Palestine, Ohio. The sound of tires crunching on gravel. 400 miles east, there were no white lilies. There was only the smell. It hit you 3 miles out, a thick metallic tang that coated the back of your throat and tasted like burnt plastic and old pennies. The trees along the county road weren't blooming. They were gray,
their branches stripped bare in the middle of spring. Karoline rolled down the window of her rental truck. She didn't have a security detail. She didn't have a convoy of SUVs. She had a GPS map that kept losing signal and a trunk full of bottled water she'd paid for herself. She drove past the police barricades that had been abandoned weeks ago. She drove past the creek where the water still ran with an unnatural, oily sheen. She pulled up to a community center that had been condemned but was still being used because the people had nowhere else to go. The air here was heavy, clinging to her skin the moment she stepped out. It was a physical weight. Inside, the scene was apocalyptic. Families were sleeping on cots, children were coughing, a dry, hacking sound that echoed off the cinder-block walls. A mother sat on the floor, wiping soot off a plastic dinosaur toy, her hands trembling. Karoline didn't walk to a podium. She walked to a folding table in the corner where a local pastor was trying to organize medical records. "They said the water was safe," the pastor said, sliding a report across the table. His eyes were red-rimmed. "The EPA came, took a sample and left, but look at this." Karoline looked. The independent tests showed levels of vinyl chloride that were off the charts. "They lied," she said. It wasn't a question. "They abandoned us," the pastor corrected. "They're hoping we just die quietly so the news cycle can move on." Karoline looked up. Across the room, a little girl was watching her. She couldn't have been more than 7. She was holding a crayon drawing. Karoline walked over and knelt down, ignoring the dirt on the floor. "Is that your house?" Karoline asked softly. The girl nodded. In the drawing, the house was black. The sky was orange. And in the middle, a stick figure stood with a yellow ponytail holding a shield. "That's you," the girl whispered. "You came when the cameras left." Karoline felt a lump form in her throat, harder and sharper than any anger she had felt before. She took the girl's hand. It was cold. At that exact moment, a notification pinged on the phone of a volunteer standing nearby. It was Michelle Obama's Instagram, a beautifully edited reel from the Chicago gala. Soft piano music played over slow-motion clips of Michelle hugging a donor. The caption read, "Light is a choice we make every day." The volunteer showed the screen to Karoline. Karoline stood up. The sadness in her eyes vanished, replaced with a cold, terrifying resolve. Light isn't a choice when your sky is blacked out by chemical smoke. She grabbed her phone. She didn't set up a ring light. She didn't check her angles. She walked out the back door of the center, standing in the twilight where the silhouette of the derailed train cars still loomed like skeletons in the distance. The air was so toxic she could taste it on her lips. She hit record. "I'm in East Palestine. Behind me is a town that has been poisoned. Inside that building are children who are breathing toxins while their government tells them it's safe." She held up the phone, showing the desolate gray landscape. Right now, Michelle Obama is hosting a gala about healing. She is talking about light to a room full of people who have never spent a night in the dark. She calls that unity. I call it distraction. They want you to look at the gala so you don't look at the grave they're digging for this town. While the country burns behind her dance floor, we are here. We are choking on the air she refuses to breathe, and we aren't going anywhere. She ended the video. Within minutes, the clip was tearing through the internet like a wildfire. It wasn't polished, it was grainy, dark, and audio distorted by the wind, but it was real. And back in Chicago, as the waiters cleared the plates of untouched food, the donors began checking their phones. The room grew quiet. The illusion of the light was flickering, and the darkness of Ohio was flooding in.
The breaking point didn't come with a bang, it came with a whimper in a laundry room on the edge of town. It was a Thursday evening, quiet and heavy with the humidity that precedes a storm. Amanda, a 30-year-old mother of 2 who had refused to leave her home because she couldn't afford a motel, was folding clothes. She had been told the water was safe, she had trusted the reports, but as she pulled a shirt from the dryer, her knees buckled. She hit the linoleum floor hard, gasping for air that suddenly felt like broken glass in her lungs. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later.
The sirens were the only sound in a town that had forgotten how to sing. Cut to the Hollywood Hills, a private estate gated by iron and ivy. 3 time zones away, the air was filled with the sound of live jazz and polite laughter. It was the night of the Hope for the Future fundraiser. The ticket price was $10,000 per plate. The theme was Global Unity. Michelle Obama stood on a patio overlooking the glittering grid of Los Angeles. She was wearing a satin gown that shimmered under the string lights. Beside her stood a constellation of pop stars and actors holding champagne flutes, nodding solemnly as she spoke about the importance of joy as resistance. "We cannot let the darkness win," Michelle said, smiling as a photographer captured the candid moment. "We must dance through the despair." The crowd cheered. They felt good. They felt righteous. They wrote checks with zeros that trailed off the page, believing they were saving the world from a patio in 90210. Hard cut. Darkness, wind hissing through dead grass. KarolineLeavitt stood alone on a ridge overlooking East Palestine. It was 8:03 p.m. The sun had set, leaving the town below bathed in the sickly yellow glow of sodium streetlights. She wasn't wearing a gown. She was wearing a windbreaker that smelled of the smoke that still clung to the valley floor. Her boots were caked in mud from the walk up the hill. She didn't have a teleprompter. She had a tripod she had set up herself in the dirt. In her hands she held a triangle of folded fabric. It was an American flag, but it wasn't pristine. The edges were black, singed by the heat of the derailment fire. It belonged to a volunteer firefighter who was currently in the ICU with chemical burns, a man Michelle Obama had never named. Karoline hit Go Live. The numbers ticked up instantly. 10,000, 50,000, 500,000. She didn't speak for a long time. She just stood there, holding the scorched flag against her chest, the wind whipping her hair across her face. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't the boom of a politician. It was a whisper that cracked with exhaustion. "They are partying tonight," she said, tears welling in her eyes. She didn't wipe them away. "In Los Angeles, the champagne is flowing. They are talking about hope while wearing diamonds that cost more than your house." She looked down at the town below, the dark houses, the empty playground, the silence. "Amanda collapsed today," Karoline said, tears welling in her eyes. She didn't wipe them away. She trusted them, and now she's on a ventilator. She lifted the scorched flag. The camera focused on the burnt threads. This is what they left behind. This is the America they don't want to see on their Instagram feeds. They want the photo op. They don't want the fire. She took a breath, and for a moment she looked directly into the soul of the camera, past the lens, past the internet, straight to the woman in the satin gown 3,000 miles away. "You talk about unity, Michelle? You talk about joy?" Karoline's voice broke, raw and devastating. "While you danced with celebrities, I wept with the mothers you abandoned. While you posed for the magazines, I walked through the fire you ignored." She held the flag tighter, her knuckles white. "If leadership is a cocktail party, then you can keep it. But if leadership is walking through the ashes, then I will carry them alone if I have to." She didn't say goodbye. She didn't ask for likes. She just reached forward and ended the stream. The screen went black, but the silence that followed was louder than any applause Michelle Obama had ever received. By midnight, the video had 8 million views. The hashtag #SheDancedIWept was trending #1 globally, overtaking the Met Gala, overtaking the NBA playoffs, overtaking everything. In the CNN newsroom, producers stared at the monitors in stunned silence. They tried to find an angle to dismiss it, to call it staged or melodramatic. But they couldn't, because you can fake a smile, but you cannot fake the burns on a flag. The narrative had snapped. The glamour was gone, and America was no longer looking at the stars. They were looking at the girl on the hill.
Washington, D.C. does not smell like smoke. It smells of floor wax, old money, and the damp, recycled air of windowless committee rooms. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. The emergency panel on environmental disaster response was ostensibly convened to discuss the situation in East Palestine. In reality, it was a trap. The establishment, rattled by the viral firestorm of #SheDanced, needed to publicly dress down the woman who had ignited it. They wanted to paint KarolineLeavitt as reckless, untrained, and divisive. Inside the hearing room, the atmosphere was sterile. Rows of mahogany desks sat high on a dais, looking down on a single wooden table. The politicians wore tailored suits worth thousands. They shuffled papers, whispered to aides, and prepared their sound bites for the evening news. Then the doors opened. Karoline didn't walk in with a legal team. She didn't walk in with a PR strategist. She walked in alone. And she wasn't wearing a pantsuit. She was wearing the same windbreaker she had worn on the ridge the night before. It was stained with mud on the cuffs. It still carried the faint, acrid scent of vinyl chloride and wood smoke, a smell that instantly cut through the sterile air of the Capitol like a physical intrusion. A hush fell over the room. The cameras shuddered frantically. "Miss Leavitt," the committee chair began, peering over his spectacles with a look of practiced condescension, "you have been accused of using a national tragedy to sow distrust in our institutions. You effectively told millions of Americans that their government and the former First Lady do not care about them. Do you think that kind of rhetoric is helpful?" Karoline sat in the wooden chair. She didn't adjust the microphone. She reached into her bag and pulled out the folded, scorched American flag. She placed it gently on the table. The black burnt edges stood out violently against the polished wood. "Helpful?" Karoline repeated. Her voice was quiet, but in the acoustic perfection of the room, it sounded like a thunderclap. She looked up, locking eyes with the chair. "You invited me here to scold me about rhetoric? Meanwhile, Amanda died this morning." A gasp rippled through the gallery. The chair blinked, caught off guard. "She died because her lungs were full of the poison you said wasn't there," Karoline continued, her voice rising, steel entering her tone. "You had millions to spend on influencer dinners. You had time for red carpet events, panels, and memoir launches. But when East Palestine cried out, you heard nothing. Dead silence." "We are not here to discuss Michelle Obama," a senator interrupted aggressively. "We are exactly here to discuss her, because she represents the lie you've all been selling. Michelle Obama wasn't absent because she was busy. She was absent because she thought no one here mattered." The room erupted. Gavels banged, aides scrambled, but Karoline didn't flinch. She stood up, placing her hand on the scorched flag. "She danced with celebrities. I walked through chemical fires. I buried a mother of 2, and I'm still here. Not for a photo, not for a vote, but for the truth." She looked at the panel, scanning their faces one by one. "You asked me if I'm trying to divide the country? No, I'm just showing you the ashes of the one you burned down." She didn't wait to be dismissed. She picked up the flag, turned on her heel, and walked out. Outside on the Capitol steps, it wasn't the press waiting for her. It was the people. Thousands of them. Veterans in wheelchairs, factory workers in hard hats, mothers holding pictures of their children. They had driven all night. They had taken buses. They stood in a massive, silent formation. When Karoline stepped out into the sunlight, they didn't chant, they didn't scream, they didn't act like a mob. Slowly, as one, they raised their hands in a salute. Karoline stopped. She lifted the scorched flag above her head, not as a prop, but as a shield. While the elites inside scrambled to spin the story, and while Michelle posted her filtered photo of a sunset with a caption about peace, Karoline stood on the steps, wiping ash off her boots, ready to head back to the fire. The split screen was gone. There was no comparison anymore. There were just those who posed and those who showed up. The media will tell you the story ended in that hearing room. They will tell you that Karoline faded away and the status quo returned. But looking at the comments, looking at the movement growing in the forgotten corners of this country, we know the truth. The fire isn't out. It's just beginning. There are 2 Americas. One is watching the gala, the other is waiting for the signal. Which one are you in? If you are tired of the lies, if you are tired of the dancing while the country burns, then you need to join us. Smash that like button if you stand with the people, not the politicians.
Share this video with 5 friends. Text it, post it, email it. The algorithm is trying to suppress this story, and you are the only way we break through. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We are going back to East Palestine next week, and you do not want to miss what we uncover next. Comment below, "I carry the ashes." Let them see how many of us there really are. We are watching, we are walking, and we are coming for the truth.